Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. This is In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me today is Courtney Stewart. Courtney, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Yeah, had some sound issues. Sorry, we had some connection issues. The truth be told, I'm making all of that up. We were on time for four shows in a row. Four shows in a row. I was just like, it's about time we blew it. So, anyways, uh, this is our second in our series on philosophy. Our first episode, we just sort of talked about, do we still need philosophy? Is philosophy still useful? And what are the different kinds of philosophy? Epistemology,
Hmm.
metaphysics, ethics, or sorry, I shouldn't say what kinds. What are the sort of different branches of philosophy? So
Hmm.
we have Ozzy on again, this time to discuss, and we definitely, we've decided a couple of episodes we want to do in short order, certainly would be Hume's problem of induction and the problem of hard consciousness. But I wanted to just sort of lay some of the groundwork a bit more on just sort of the basics before we do that. So, Ozzy, welcome to the show, and we wanted to discuss epistemology with you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. This is always a pleasure. It's always an honor to be invited to talk about these kinds of things. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you.
And Courtney, very nice to meet you. Actually, I've seen you on the show before, but
Oh
I've never
yeah.
spoken to you yet. So it's very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I always forget that like people actually watch this. I forget that like people might see me and have listened to stuff I've done. It's funny. It doesn't cross my mind.
Right.
We well, and for the thumbnail, we used the U for from Osmandius from the Watchmen, and we put that up on the thumbnail. So people have been commenting on how buff you look and on your nipple thing on your suit of armor. So it may not have set the right tone, but I think it works. It works.
All right. I just one word about that. A fellow who was a subscriber to my channel actually created that little graphic of my face superimposed on the supervillain or superhero, depending on how you see the person, Ozymandias. So
Um,
that wasn't my vanity, but I thought it was such a nice job that I decided to make it my avatar. It's been my avatar for like 6 or 7 years now.
it's funny.
So all right. So like I said before, we've already sort of covered the basics of what is philosophy. Do we still need it? What are the purviews of philosophy? And if I recall last time when we had discussed this, you had said, well, basically, most things started out as philosophy, and then what would happen
Mm.
is that other fields would be born from it, where the inquiry would become sort of more. Uh, if I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. I think we may have froze you there. I'll work on that. That other disciplines would sort of eventually branch out from that, and what was left having been unanswered is what is still in philosophy. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah. So my view is that they're just questions. People just ask all kinds of questions, and there are questions that are mundane, have obvious answers, and then there are questions that are more sophisticated that require more sophisticated methods to answer them. And sometimes we have a domain of knowledge that can answer those questions. And where there's a domain of knowledge, how do you cut hair? Oh well, you go to a hair salon, you go to a hairstyling school or something like that, and you
Mm.
learn, right? Or maybe you have questions about the natural world, about the movement of the heavens or something like that, right? There are people that you can consult. But if you go back far enough, there were not always experts, and there were not always domains of inquiry. But as domains of inquiry developed, whether they be mundane or esoteric, um, uh, those are not considered philosophy because there's an established group of people who have expertise and have procedures and ways of answering those questions. But every question that remains that isn't a mundane question, that is kind of a stumper, that's a philosophical question. And then over
Hmm.
the course of history, what ends up happening in philosophy is either among the philosophers, they come to formulate the questions such that they will admit of an answer, and then a new field emerges, or independently of what philosophers are doing, somebody else comes up with a way of formulating the problem and answering the questions, and a discipline develops there. And so, consequently, over the course of history, what used to be philosophical questions disappear. They drop out of the purview, out of the province of philosophy, and they become a department in the humanities or in the social sciences or in the natural sciences or in theology or something like that. But I mean, there's a certain sense in which we're all philosophers. We're all concerned with very deep, long-standing and abiding questions. But some of them are enduring, and there is nobody out there who's an expert on what constitutes knowledge, for instance, or what constitutes right and wrong. There are lots of competing theories. They're all very much alive. Some are better than others. Philosophers are the people that try to familiarize themselves with enough of these questions in enough detail to sort out what are the obviously bad answers and what are the viable answers. And hopefully at some point, every philosophical question will be answered and some new discipline will emerge. But that's sort of like an idealization of the process, but it will never come to pass. But that is generally what happens, yes. That new disciplines emerge out of philosophy, either out of the contributions of philosophers or sometimes just as often independently of anything philosophers are doing.
Well, so the largest field, in my view, I think it's usually accepted that the largest field in philosophy is epistemology. So what is that field?
All right. Well, epistemology is that branch of philosophy that concerns itself with questions having to do with certain concepts such as truth, belief, knowledge, science, evidence, reason, logic, argument, what we call the philosophy of science, statistics and probability, everything that has to do with how we come to understand the world. And so there are philosophers who specialize in epistemology will be concerned with very basic questions like, what is a belief? As opposed, is a belief different than an opinion? What is knowledge? Is knowledge merely the possession of a true belief, or is it something more? What is evidence? What constitutes good evidence? What constitutes a rational or warranted belief? What falls within the bounds of formal logic and informal logic? If you're concerned with fallacies and errors in reasoning, you're in the field of epistemology. So epistemologists spend an awful lot of time sort of agonizing over fallacies, what constitutes a formal fallacy and an informal fallacy, how to spot them, and so forth. So it is that branch of philosophy that concerns itself with our understanding of the world. And by understanding of the world, I don't mean just the natural world. I mean our understanding of broader reality. For instance, is logic part of the natural world, or is it something else? What about metaphysical questions, right? So you can ask epistemological questions about other branches. You can ask epistemological questions about the sciences, right? What constitutes good science? What is the difference between science and pseudoscience? That's an epistemological question within the area of philosophy of science, right?
I love that distinction.
Is there such a thing as a metaphysical question? Can there be answers to metaphysical questions? If there is such a thing as knowledge, are there kinds of knowledge? Is there a difference between empirical knowledge and other kinds of knowledge? For instance, the knowledge that you're in pain, for me, is something empirical. I have to infer that you're in pain, for instance. But if I smash my elbow or if I have a toothache or something like that, I don't have to infer from my own behavior that I'm in pain. I just seem to know that I'm in pain. I seem to be aware that I'm in pain. In other words, my access to the facts of my pain is different from the access that I have to your pain, right? My access to your pain, for instance, is inferential. And so it would seem that there's a difference between first-person knowledge and second or third-person knowledge. So all of these are epistemological concerns. So that is what the field of epistemology is. It deals with all of those sorts of questions that have to do with knowledge.
All right, and let me interrupt real quick. We've got a $5 super chat from Nate Brody. Nate, thank you so much. He said, 3 of my favorite people in the room, and please give me an exact definition of atheism.
Well, it seems so separate.
Oh, I may have tweaked that slightly. There may have been the word "not" in there somewhere, or please don't. But thank you, Nate. Thank you so much. So. Yeah, I think we'll stay away from definitions, I think, for now. But he did a good job with that one. But all right. So epistemology is concerned, I guess, in shorthand, maybe what is truth, maybe, or, truth and or knowledge. So
And how do we know what we know, right?
Right. Yeah. Did I leave the word truth out of that account, that description of epistemology? If I thought I mentioned it early on, but maybe I didn't. I didn't expound on that enough. There are many competing theories of what constitutes truth, as opposed to how we know what the truth is or how we arrive at the truth. Right. So and those are separate questions. And before you can have a theory of how we know what is true, what the verification procedure would be for arriving at true beliefs, we have to have some account of what we mean by the word truth. What is truth? What do we mean? And are there different kinds of truths? So that too would be a sub branch within epistemology.
So has epistemology come to any conclusions so far in general just on truth? Is truth achievable? Is it just degrees of truth? What is the general consensus? The bottom, I know there's a lot of areas where there's not consensus, but where is there consensus?
There isn't consensus there. There are really theories of truth is a very vibrant, vigorously debated area of epistemology. There are very strongly defined camps with respect to what constitutes truth. Let me start with I'll enumerate a few of them. The very simplest one, the one that is probably most intuitive, it's the one that I subscribe to, and I think I'm actually in a minority in holding this position these days, but that would be the correspondence theory of truth. The correspondence theory of truth is just the concept that you have a belief, such as this is a human hand, right here in front of me, my human hand. And what makes that sentence, that proposition, this is a human hand, true, is that there's some state of affairs in the world to which that proposition corresponds. That's the correspondence theory of truth. That seems fairly obvious and intuitive. It seems hard to deny, but there are actually problems with that conception of truth. There are other conceptions of truth let's consider. First of all, there are anti-realists. There are people who don't even believe in the concept of truth. There are people who are sort of nihilists with respect to the truth. They think there's no such thing as the truth. Not merely that we can't achieve it, but that the concept is somehow ill-conceived. There's just no hope. It's a concept that's archaic, and we should dispense with it. That I think is a mistake, and I think it is definitely a minority opinion in philosophy. I don't think you would spend a lot of time in philosophy if you held a nihilistic view of truth. But there are pragmatic theories of truth that the truth is to be understood in terms of the procedures by which we arrive at our beliefs, pragmatically construed. There are deflationary theories of truth. I don't want to start spelling all these out because you can spend a lot of time on each one of them. But the idea is that there is not one settled consensus on even the meaning of the word truth. Now, you can just imagine that if your concept of evidence and your concept of reason and your concept of what it means for someone to have a belief and your concept of knowledge, if all of these concepts involve the word truth in them, right? If truth is an ingredient in any of these other concepts, and people don't agree on truth, you can just imagine the plurality of theories there are on what constitutes a belief, what constitutes knowledge, what constitutes evidence, what constitutes reason, and so forth. So no, there's not a consensus view on what constitutes truth, and consequently, there isn't a consensus in most areas of epistemology.
So we have I want to give Courtney a chance to also ask any questions, but we do have one from Saka.
Right. If truth is an ingredient in any of these other concepts,
asking, and people. With correspondence theory of truth, it seems to make the most sense, but if there is an epistemic problem with this, wouldn't that mean we might just not know what's true, not that we should redefine it?
Yeah, well, that's the skeptic's position, for instance. Okay, sort of a classical skeptical position is: look, we all know what we mean by the truth. We're clear on the concept of truth. A skeptic might say we know what we understand what we mean, what it is we aspire to attain when we talk about the truth. This corresponds with reality. That is, I want my beliefs and the sentences that I utter, that are expressions of my beliefs. We want them to correspond to some state of affairs in the world. Right? That's a clear enough concept. It's not that clear. There are actually some difficulties with it, but let's leave it at that. Let's just say let's grant that that's clear. A skeptic can say, well, wait a minute. You can grant that the concept and the goal is commendable and clear and well conceived, but the problem is we don't have a verification procedure. We have no way of establishing, once we put forward a theory or something like that and start, assessing evidence and so forth. We have no way of telling if we have arrived at the truth. It's not like if I say to you, I believe that this is a hand, that I have some independent way of establishing that this is a hand other than the evidence that I offer, right? Or any statement that I make about reality, it is presumably possible that there's another interpretation of the same facts that I think are lead me to the conclusion that statement that I made is true. So a skeptic is someone who thinks that ultimately truth might be a coherent concept. It might be perfectly intelligible, but it is nevertheless unattainable. So even if you are satisfied that you have a robust account of what we mean by the truth, it doesn't mean that you are therefore automatically supplied with a verification procedure that lets you establish when you are in possession of the truth and when you merely think you are in possession of the truth. Because, of course, beliefs can be false. Beliefs aspire to be true. That is, whenever I believe something, I believe it to be true. There isn't much distinction there to be made between saying X is the case and I believe X is the case. When I say X is the case, I am merely expressing my belief that X is the case. So if you're in the business of having any beliefs at all, you're in the business of trying to say what's true. But of course, it is possible to have false beliefs. And if there isn't some way of ruling out that your beliefs are false because you've simply misread the facts, you have failed to take into account another interpretation of all of the facts that would lead to a different conclusion, then you might be left with skepticism. So that's sort of the one way of understanding what philosophical skepticism is.
Well, it sounds like.
So,
please.
So that's so cool that's a whole field, because it's exciting. I don't know too much about the field of philosophy, and it can be confusing, I think, when people coming from the social sciences, at least for my case, is you kind of have to dance on that line between a more hard science kind of approach and something that's more qualitative, that seems more philosophical or dealing in inferences, and that's interesting to me, because it's sort of, we call that the soft science, as you were saying, social sciences, and there's different fields of psychology that are harder than others, really, and I don't know, it's interesting, because there is this concept of there being within science, of there being a certain level of uncertainty that we all have to admit to in the sciences. You don't deal with proofs in science. You deal with what the evidence suggests at this point in time. And so that's a really interesting thing, because I think that when you're looking at finding truth, the sciences look at eliminating what can't be true and working from there, kind of process of elimination, and trying to disprove an idea that they have in order to find what is closest to the truth. But they would never say, this is the truth, and end of our day, end of our field, because there's always new things to learn. And I think scientists really love the unknown, because they love there being more to explore at all times.
Yeah, you raised a lot of interesting points there. Like, first of all, this distinction between the hard sciences and the soft sciences. or the natural sciences and the social sciences and so forth.
Mm.
That is itself an epistemological theory. It's one that's sort of widely out there. It's not constrained by philosophical considerations. I mean, the average person on the street, if you ask them for any, sociology, is that a science? And they'll say, yeah, I guess it's a science. And you say, well, guess what? Why? Well, they'll say, well, it's not like physics and chemistry. It's not a hard science. It's not a natural science. It's a social science. It's soft, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well then where would you put biology? Well, that's kind of a hard science, but it's not as hard as physics and chemistry, but it's harder than psychology, right? Which is kind of squishier.
Degrees.
Yeah, and sociology might be squishier yet, and so forth. So, but this is an idea that sort of permeates our culture. This idea that the knowledge that we think that we have acquired is only as secure as the methodologies employed within those specific domains, right? So we think the physicists are really onto something. So the physics is really secure, and the chemistry is also very secure, but not quite as secure as the physics, right? So we sort of imagine all of reality and our understanding of reality as kind of hierarchically organized. We sort of imagine that look, okay, admittedly, economics and sociological theories and facts, they're kind of squishy, but ultimately they rest on individual psychological facts. And individual psychological facts, well, they rest on the neurophysiology of our brains. And the neurophysiology of our brains, that rests on the findings of the biological sciences. And the biological sciences are ultimately resting on chemistry. And chemistry is ultimately resting on physics. And that's as secure as math, just about, right? And so forth. And so we have this idea that this scale, this kind of stack of human knowledge of everything around us, and we tend to have a model of what constitutes good, rigorous, solid, dependable knowledge. And usually, physics is sort of seen as the queen of the sciences, as it used to be called. But then there's this kind of gradation, this spectrum into the softer and softer sciences until you finally get into something that is highly speculative, right? So that's kind of an interesting feature. We don't realize that, although most of us think in these terms, we don't realize that we are in fact walking around with a philosophy of science in our heads. Everybody is walking around with this philosophy of science. This just sort of, I would say, a little bit naive, but intuitive and broadly correct picture of human knowledge. But it's kind of funny how that's out there. That's permeated. It's out there in the culture. And even if a person has never thought explicitly in these terms, if you just ask them, if you just interrogate them, if you just laid out a bunch of different theories and you said, which ones are more secure, which ones are more speculative and stuff like that, most people could rank order them, even though they have no expertise in any of them, right? Most of us have an idea. The physics is the model of how you get answers. The answers are very exact and very, very, very precise and very, very securely established. And then as you move away from physics, you move into less secure knowledge, right? And I find that kind of fascinating. That idea is so widely shared. It's practically universal.
Well, and in like chemistry, in terms of like being an engineer, there are things that you have to know. I've made some friends recently that are engineers, both of them. It's a couple that's a friend of mine, and they were saying that somebody coming into a lab with no training. There was a guy that this woman worked with who there was a cup with a chemical in it, a liquid, and it was there was a lid on it, and the person thought that so it didn't have a lid on it, and the person thought that it maybe it did need a lid because they were a brand new intern and they were put in this lab even though they should not have been in there. And what happened is they thought, oh well, maybe it needs a lid, and so they put the lid on there, and then immediately it just exploded because it was something that cannot be without oxygen or whatever it was. And it was just like, in that sense, we are aware of what will happen. There are an understanding of things that will and won't happen. So in that sense, that, like you said, with physics and chemistry, there are things that we know will happen and things that we're still finding out. But for example, my degree is in psychology, and so I've conducted research, and there are things that we kind of that I think we know within psychology that the average person doesn't realize how solid our knowledge is of human behavior in certain contexts. And yet, I think there are a lot of things within psychology that the students of psychology don't realize are extremely variable and questionable, and who funded the research and what were the politics of the time and what were the opinions about it and all those things. So there's so many things that kind of go into that, but it's just really interesting because there is a huge difference between the sciences, and that can be true for sure. But I found it really interesting being within the field of psychology and getting that training, that the things that we eliminate as not true, or the things that we test against reality, tell us quite a lot about human beings and have predictive value, which to me is a good understanding of what is true, if it has like predictive powers, I guess.
Oh, that's a really good point. Okay, so there's a bunch of good points in there I'd like to remark on. First of all, one thing I want to mention is you reiterated it here, but earlier you had mentioned this idea of testing and a kind of process of elimination, sort of eliminating the false theories. And most people listening will probably be familiar with this concept of falsification. This is a theory. Well, it's a theory. It is a concept that was advanced by a philosopher of science named Karl Popper. Scientists have always conducted experiments, but they haven't always conducted experiments very well. If you had gone back a century and a half ago and asked scientists what they were in the business of doing, they would have told you that they were in pursuit of the truth, and they conducted experiments in order to prove or support a theory. You will find almost no scientist talks that way today, and it's largely because of the work of Karl Popper, who reoriented people's thinking about what science is in the business of doing. According to Karl Popper, science is in the business of falsifying or refuting theories. It's in the business of advancing a hypothesis that falls within the scope of a theory, making predictions on the basis of that, testing those predictions by conducting experiments. Indeed, that's what an experiment is. It's not an attempt to prove anything. It's an attempt to falsify something.
Yes.
And now, but implicit in that, most people have implicitly think implicitly that, well, okay, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. Science is in the business of falsifying things, and by eliminating all these possibilities, we zero in on the truth. We just carve away one falsehood after another after another. And intuitively that makes a lot of sense. But there is philosophically a problem with that, and that is that the number of theories that could potentially explain a phenomenon or a set of phenomena is virtually infinite. It is subject only to the fecundity of our imaginations. And so, in a certain sense, we're not getting closer to the truth. Yes, we've eliminated another false theory, another false hypothesis. And so what we have is a hypothesis that is alive and standing for now. But is it closer to the truth? Not if there's an infinity of potential explanations, right? If there is literally only as many explanations as the fertility of our imaginations, then we're not actually getting closer. Now, of course, no one's walking around with 1,000 potential explanations for any given thing, but there's no end to the number of explanations that we could advance. And so, according to Popper, you don't get closer to the truth. You don't actually, you're not zeroing in. That Popper would have rejected that, even though that is a view that many people come away with when they read Popper or they hear about Popper and refutability. But definitely scientists nowadays, in part because of the contributions of philosophy of science and people like Karl Popper, now conceive of their task as scientists. They conceive of their task as being that of trying to disprove and falsify and discredit specific hypotheses and theories, and not to support them. We no longer are in the age of scientific confirmation. We don't try to confirm a theory. All that happens when a theory fails to be refuted, that is, when the predictions turn out right and the theory isn't falsified, the best that you can say now is that the theory is corroborated. So scientists no longer think so much in terms of confirmation theory, they think in terms of corroboration theory. Corroboration is a long way from confirmation. It's a long way from that capital T truth that you talked about. And that's kind of an interesting thing. And that is actually a contribution that philosophy has made to all of us. It is actually, thanks to Karl Popper and philosophers of science who propounded his work, scientists are better at being scientists now. I mean, okay, so you said you studied psychology. I studied psychology as an undergraduate. You would have taken a course in experimental or lab methods, right? You would have taken a course in how to design an experiment. You would have taken courses on what constitutes the dependent and independent variables, for instance. On your experiment, and you can't specify what your dependent and independent variables are. You don't know what the hell you're testing. You don't know if you're testing anything. Right? So now that entire vocabulary is comes from the philosophy of science. Not that people weren't doing that before, but they weren't self-consciously doing it. They didn't understand it in those terms, and so people now have a better understanding of what constitutes an experiment, a genuine experiment, as opposed to a pseudo experiment. Right? It's very easy to trick yourself, right? So sometimes people will sort of fault philosophy and say, well, what has philosophy ever given us? Well, it's made science better. It's made science more rigorous, right? I mean, philosophers are not themselves scientists, but they study an awful lot of science. I mean, I shared an office with a fellow who was interested in the philosophy of physics, that is, the philosophical questions that are implied by the latest findings in physics. He had to know a ton of math. He had to know a ton of physics. I mean, he had an advanced degree in physics, and he was pursuing a PhD in philosophy because his interest was in the philosophical implications of contemporary physical theories. So it is not like philosophers are just sort of sitting in their armchairs and madly speculating. They actually sort of get in there and they study fields. So, for instance, you talked about, Courtney, you mentioned how certain theories in psychology can be influenced by the politics and people's attitudes of the day, right? Lots of things you pass as robust psychological theories that we now discredit, right? And then even today, things like IQ, for instance, is an area of study that is highly politicized, right?
And in like Psych 101, they're gonna in Psych 101, they're just gonna say it doesn't study a thing, right? IQ. But it's still used.
I mean, I think there's more to IQ theory. I mean, I'm not someone who puts a lot of stock in IQ theory, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that. But I don't think the IQ measures anything called general intelligence. I don't think there's such a thing as general intelligence.
Right.
It's like saying it's like I compare it to athleticism. There's a million ways to be athletic, right? A gymnast is a different kind of athlete than a shot putter. And what makes them athletic are completely different things. And I think that I subscribe to the theory of multiple intelligences. There are many different ways of being intelligent. That's not to say that everyone's equally intelligent any more than everyone's equally athletic. But there's a lot of ways to be athletic. And there isn't a measure of general athleticism, and I don't think there's a measure of general intelligence. So I think IQ tests measure something, but the thing that they're measuring, I don't think that's general intelligence. But see, even that would be a particular philosophical position with respect to intelligence testing, with respect to the domain of inquiry that we call psychology. And there's a whole branch within philosophy that is concerned with something called the sociology of knowledge. In fact, there's a branch of sociology called the sociology of knowledge. But these two sort of converge. The sociology of knowledge and the philosophy of science converge, and they are very interested in these kinds of questions. Exactly when does science stop being the disinterested pursuit of truth, and when does it just become a way of rationalizing a particular political ideology or a popular trend or something like that? We've certainly seen cases like that happening. We see that more, I think, in the social sciences and humanities, less so in the natural sciences, but certainly a contemporary criticism of a lot of the natural sciences, especially in biology, is that a lot of the science is done in service of advancing particular groups that are in power. I mean, it's very common right now to hear from some quarters that evolutionary theory is just a way of holding some groups down and holding other people up. The field of evolutionary psychology, for instance, is in disrepute from those particular quarters, mostly from people on the left, but also sometimes from people on the right, that sort of thing. I have no beef with evolutionary psychology. I think when done correctly and rigorously and responsibly, I think it's an indispensable field that's going to advance our understanding of us and our culture. So I stand against those people who criticize it that way. But that's
I see what you're referring to. I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I guess I had a couple of questions. You had said, let's see, you had been talking about beliefs, and I guess I have a couple of questions about beliefs. The way you had used the word belief earlier, or you had framed it in terms of philosophy, suggested to me that almost the word would have no value because any claim to knowledge would be a belief claim of some kind. So if that's the case, do you think there's a difference between saying you know something to be true and you believe something to be true?
Yes, I think there's a huge difference. The problem is we can't tell if we're in possession of a mere belief that is true or a mere belief that is false, and knowledge. We can't always tell. Okay, so I mean, it seems odd. I mean, how can there be this distinction if you can't tell which case you find yourself in? But it's an analytical distinction. That is to say, it's a distinction in the meaning of the word. So, what is a belief? Okay, now there are different ways of understanding the word belief. Some people sometimes use the word belief in a disparaging tone. What they mean by that is a mere opinion, a mere belief, an unwarranted belief. Right? You'll hear sometimes people say, "I don't believe in evolution." I hear a lot of my fellow atheists say things like this. "I don't believe in evolution. I accept the facts of evolution," or "I accept that evolution is a fact." Well, of course, that's just what it means to have a belief that evolution is true, right? If you think evolution happened, if you think evolution is a fact, that's what it means to say that you believe that evolution happened, right? That's all it is to have a belief, is to think that something is the case. Right? To have a belief is to hold something is the case. But there is presumably a difference between merely believing something on no evidence, an unwarranted belief, and a warranted belief, a belief for which you do have evidence, right? And presumably there is a difference between having a belief for which you have evidence that is false, where the belief happens to be false. You have evidence, but the belief happens to be false anyway. That is, there might be evidence that you're unaware of that would change your mind. Right? So you can have a warranted belief that is true, but you can have a warranted belief that is false. You can have a belief that for which you have excellent reasons, but it turns out it's false for reasons that you're unaware of. Right? So you can have true beliefs and false beliefs. You can have warranted beliefs and unwarranted beliefs. Among the warranted beliefs, they too can be true and false. So these are all analytical distinctions. Right? That is, there are conceptual distinctions to be made here. Right? Now, at any given moment, I don't know if my belief is warranted or not, well warranted or not. I might think it is. For instance, I believe that Australia is a real place. It's a real continent. It's on the other side of the world from where I live. It's in the southern hemisphere. I've never been there. I've met people who say they've been there. I watch TV shows. I've looked at the globe. I've seen the Earth spinning on its axis and stuff like that. I have what I take to be excellent reasons to think that Australia exists. But it is conceivable. That is not likely, but it is conceivable that all that evidence is wrong. That I am in the position of someone who's been duped as some vast conspiracy, right? Just like we all conspire with children and tell them about Santa Claus and he lives at the North Pole and you got to leave milk and cookies out for him and he's the one that put the presents under the tree and all that. Children have adults whom they trust implicitly, from whom they formulate their entire worldview uncritically, just credulously believing everything their parents tell them.
Mm.
We're all conspiring and deluding these kids into believing something that is false. Maybe I find myself in that position. So I think I have excellent reasons for thinking that Australia is real. It's a real place, okay? But it's not impossible that I am mistaken, okay? And I don't have a way of testing right now, right? I mean, I could test it. I mean, I could just board a plane and fly there, and that would settle it for me firsthand. I wouldn't have to rely on anyone's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have to look at independent evidence, right? I would have the best possible evidence. I'd be able to experience it myself directly.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, at any given moment, I'm not necessarily in position to assess whether I have a well-warranted belief or whether my belief merely appears well-warranted. So even when you say, I have a well-warranted, a well-justified belief, that itself is a belief that you have. That's a belief about the evidence that you possess, right? It's a meta-belief, if you like. It's a belief about your beliefs, a belief about the evidence that you hold for certain other beliefs, okay? There's another distinction, another analytical distinction we can introduce, and that's knowledge. Knowledge is different than a merely warranted belief, because the concept of a warranted belief is one that admits of falsehood. I could have a warranted belief, and it could be false, right? I mean, when I was 5 years old, I believed in Santa Claus, okay? I had a well-warranted belief. I had every reason to think Santa was real. You know, I saw him in the mall with my own 2 eyes. Parents confirmed that was Santa. I had been told about Santa before this. I'd seen the presents that he brings me. I had a well-warranted belief in Santa. It turned out to be false, okay? So there's no contradiction in saying you can have a well-warranted belief and the belief is false. But where knowledge is concerned, things are kind of different. The concept of knowledge entails with it truth. You can't have false knowledge. You can't say that Jones knew that there was a glass of water over there if there was never a glass of water over there. He can't have known it. He could have believed it. He could have had all the evidence in the world. He could have believed it with extreme conviction, but it wouldn't have constituted knowledge if it was false. Knowledge carries with it the concept of truth. Just as it doesn't make sense to say, I know that this is a human hand, if I don't even believe that it's a human hand. We understand that belief is an ingredient in knowledge and knowing something. Similarly, truth is an ingredient in knowledge, according to most theories of knowledge, according to most epistemologists. Not every epistemologist would share this view. But most epistemologists would concur that for something to constitute knowledge, you have to have a belief that such and such is the case. Such and such has to be the case, has to actually be true, and it has to be warranted somewhat or justified. That's the famous JTB account of knowledge, the justified true belief account of knowledge. Okay? That is a mere definition of knowledge. Okay, and it's one that captures our intuitions about how we use the word knowledge. Notice, I can say I had a belief and it was false, and I can say I had a warranted belief that turned out to be false. But you can't say I knew something to be the case and it was false. When it comes to knowledge, we retract. For instance, we don't say of people in bygone ages who believed that the earth was flat, that they knew the earth was flat. They thought they knew the earth was flat, but we know otherwise, right? As soon as we come to think that the metaphysical truth condition on knowledge is not satisfied, as soon as we realize, hey, they weren't in possession of the truth, it doesn't matter how well warranted it was. We say they never knew it. Okay? We don't say they never believed it. We say, oh no, they believed it. We don't say they never had any justification. Oh, they had justifications for thinking that the world was flat. You know, they couldn't see the curve, for instance, right? They had evidence. So we don't retract the claim that they believed it. We don't retract the claim that they had warrant or justification for it. But we do say, but they didn't know it. Well, why didn't they know it? Because it's not true. If it's not true, they couldn't have known it. So it's a condition on knowledge that the belief be true. So that's an analytical distinction between the concept of knowledge, right, and the concept of a warranted belief or a true belief. Okay. So the idea is that, yes, I might not be able to tell which condition I'm in. I might not be able to tell if I have a true belief or a false belief. I might not be able to tell if my belief is well warranted or unwarranted. And for all I know it. I might satisfy all the conditions on knowledge, but I might not be able to know that I know. That doesn't mean that knowledge doesn't exist. It might mean that the meta-knowledge about your knowledge doesn't exist. So you might not be able to know that you know, but that doesn't mean that you don't know. So for instance, I think I know that this is a human hand. Okay? I think that I have the belief that right now I'm looking at my own human hand. And I have excellent evidence. It's well warranted. And it happens to be true. And you'll say, well, Ozzy, how do you know that it's true? Well, I don't have a way of establishing that the metaphysical truth condition. However, if it is the case that all those conditions are met, that is, I believe it, I have a justification or a warrant for it, and it's true, if those three conditions are satisfied, then I know that this is a human hand that I'm looking at. And so it is a conceptual distinction that we make between knowledge and justified belief and mere belief and true belief and false belief and so forth. These are analytical distinctions that we make in philosophy. We make these distinctions in philosophy because these are distinctions that we make in ordinary language, in ordinary parlance. We do not use the words knowledge and truth and knowledge and fact and knowledge and belief interchangeably. There's sometimes where there's a little bit of slippage, okay? But typically we don't. For instance, the word truth. You'll sometimes hear people use the word, they'll say, that's your truth. My truth is different, right? What they're saying is, that's what you believe, and that's what I believe. They're substituting the word truth. They're using it as a cognate word for the word belief. That is your picture, something about what your picture of reality, something about which you're deeply convicted, something for which you feel some deep level of conviction. Okay, but literally speaking, they're not talking about the truth, even though they might insist that they are, because they're accustomed to using that word. You can point out in other avenues of their life, they distinguish all the time between truth and falsehood, and there's no your truth and my truth. Look, the truth is the truth. The truth is whatever is the case. And you'll say, but Oz, what's the case? I don't know what's the case. All I know is that what we mean by the truth is whatever is the case. Right? That's the state of affairs that makes a proposition true. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the truth.
I've said that to my family before. The difference between the truth and your truth. Yeah, because my parents are the type that, you know, they're my parents, and I was like, you know, early 20s, and they're talking about their religious belief, and they say, you know, well, this is the truth, and to them that's true, and it took me a long time for my dad to stop saying that and understand the difference between him saying this is the truth and this is your truth, but it's not my truth. And so it's just, I did have to make that distinction, and it's a useful one to make in that context where you're trying to explain that you don't subscribe to what they consider to be true.
Yeah. The word truth is it's sort of under assault right now. Not the word, but the concept of truth, a robust concept of truth, is very much under assault these days. And
I was going to ask you about that.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you about that, just the concept of what is true and what is opinion, or what is true and what is propaganda in the current political climate. I feel like your field is a very important one right now.
Yeah, well, I got to beg off saying my field. I don't work in the field. I don't have a PhD in philosophy. I quit grad school before I attained the degree, and I don't publish in the field of philosophy. So it's not my field. I am not a philosopher. I'm just a sort of someone who loves philosophy and has remained interested. I've just got an abiding interest in the area. But with that qualifier. Yeah, I think epistemology is that branch of philosophy that you should be the most concerned with if you're interested in subjects like talking points like fake news, right? That's actually a fascinating area, sort of, because nobody has a definitive procedure for telling or distinguishing that their beliefs are true as opposed to mistaken, because everyone's been in the position of being absolutely convinced of things, and then sometime later being absolutely embarrassed that you ever believed such a stupid thing, right? We've all been in that position, and there's no one is ever in a position to guarantee that they're not making such a mistake right now. And I think right now we live in a political climate where a lot of social institutions have been undermined, such that people's confidence in the reliability of those institutions to purvey accurate information is so eroded that they think, well, I'll just get my news from whatever source I want. So I mean, now it's really weird. We have this multiplicity of sources of information now, but that has done nothing to make us more confident that we know things. If anything, it has made us think that other people are deluded, and I know what I think I know, but without any better reason than anybody else has. It's kind of frightening, but it's a condition we've always lived with. We've actually always been in that condition of radical uncertainty about sources of information. You know, I mean, if you live in North Korea, you know, you really only have one source of information. It's the official party line of the state, right? And everyone there pretty much knows things as far as they're concerned. They think they're all in possession of knowledge, presumably. There's not a lot of conflicting opinions. There's not a lot of reasons to for doubt. Everything speaks in favor of whatever the party line is. Okay, but obviously we think, oh my goodness, from the outside looking in, we think, man, that is a terribly deluded state to find yourself in. I would hate that misfortune of having been born and grown up in North Korea, where there's not a plurality of voices and opinions. We are kind of in the opposite extreme now, where there's this multiplicity of conflicting opinions, and it's hard to sort out the truth. And we no longer have confidence that there are reliable purveyors of information. I mean, people used to watch the 6 o'clock news. There were 3 networks, you know, and then there was like PBS and stuff like that. And that was it. And people felt that there was a kind of consensus on what the facts were. And that has completely gone. And the further people are driven apart, and the more animus is generated because of that, the less mistrustful people are of other people's sources of information. So now I've noticed this just in the last few years, especially, people won't even consider information you put forward unless it is from a source of information that they would approve of. But they wouldn't approve of that source of information if it's putting forward a message different than the sort of message that they're accustomed to agreeing with. And so I saw this in a thread today on Facebook. Actually, people were arguing about the whole Black Lives Matter movement and evidence about it had to do with crime statistics in Black people in the United States. And people were sort of tossing back and forth various studies that showed this and that, and almost no one was actually engaging with any of the evidence. Everyone was simply trying to impugn one another's sources and say, oh, well, yeah, but you got that. That's from Fox News. Well, I can discount that. Well, if that's from Fox News, you can just discount it. Okay. And the other side does the same thing. That's from a CNN poll, or that's from a study conducted that was conducted by the New York Times or the Washington Post. Well, we all know they're in the bag for the other party and so forth, right? And so there's not a lot of epistemology going on there. That is, say, people involved in that kind of political epistemology, their epistemology, that is their theory of knowledge, their theory of assessing evidence here, consists of, do I like the sources? And then that's it. And if you don't like it, then you just discount everything that's said. So there's no actual consultation of the evidence. There's only a kind of ad hominem attack on purveyors of information. So there's this real crisis of confidence in reliable purveyors of information, and we just don't have as many institutions as we used to have, where everyone could just say, okay, if so and so said it, or if such and such an institution said it, that's probably right. There'll always be some people who dissent, like that general consensus is largely eroded. That consensus might always have been a mistake in the past, but it was very, very comforting to have. And I think we're all feeling its absence now.
Well, and I think that really obviously helped political divides, because if both sides are dealing with a basis of what they believe is true or what the facts of a situation are, then they can disagree on what to do about it, but at least they're agreeing on what the situation is and what they're dealing with. And we're not dealing with that right now. There's a sense that, you know, the world is not at all the way that the other side paints it, and it's, I think it leads you to absolutely nowhere in terms of compromising. Uh-oh.
Well, Ozzy,
I think we lost you.
you're muted
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there
I
you
had
go.
muted.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one way of summing that up is that people no longer agree on the facts.
Yeah.
People used to agree on the facts. I mean, I think this is kind of pie in the sky and a bit of revisionism and sort of remembering how things were with rose-colored glasses. But it is often said that people used to agree on the facts, but would disagree
Right.
about what to do about the facts, what the policies
Right.
were. And now people don't even agree on the facts.
Right.
So, you know, either racism is worse than it's ever been, or it's better than it's ever been. Wow. Okay. Well, obviously the policies are going to differ on that, and you know, the two sides are never going to meet because they don't at least agree on the facts. They can't. They cannot be persuaded that the other person's solution to the problem is a good solution if you don't think that there's a problem there. Each side thinks that there isn't a problem, right? Or that the problem is different than what it is, right? And you can't persuade me that you know the best solution for, you know, equality between the sexes is affirmative action if I think that there's already equality between the sexes, and there's no glass ceiling or something like that, right? So if we don't agree on the facts, then the social solutions, the political solutions are done. So one of the things I would like from the standpoint of epistemology is, as a kind of remedy for this, it's a long-term remedy, is I wish we could teach epistemology in school. I wish that by the time a kid was 10 years old, they had some basic logic under their belt. You could teach kids very basic probability. I mean, no one should be bamboozled by statistics by the time they leave high school. I mean, we study mathematics for 12 years, and by the time most students leave their final year of high school, none of them know anything about statistics. They don't know the difference between, when you study psychology, you're going to know the difference between the mean, the median, and the mode, right? And people swap those around all the time when they want to bamboozle others, right? Just for starters, right? And I mean, think of what better position people would be in if they could not be so readily bamboozled by statistics. If everyone's grasp of basic statistics was as good as their grasp of basic arithmetic, right? But you don't need much more than basic arithmetic to understand basic statistics. Same with probability. No one should be buying lottery tickets, right? It's really a failure of understanding probability theory that people are buying lottery tickets, right? And so there are sort of institutionalized forms of stupidity and irrationality in our culture that can be capitalized and exploited by various forces in our culture because people don't know how to know. They don't know how to see bullshit. We don't teach fallacies in high school. We don't teach critical thinking. So, I mean, a reform would be from elementary on, start teaching critical thinking, start teaching elementary logic.
I've been saying that for so long.
Yeah, I know. No one can do it, you know. And so my good solution is this: okay, eliminate gym and start teaching all those things I just talked about. Just get rid of gym.
Right.
No one ever lost a pound in gym, and no one ever got fit in gym. So that's never going to happen. And that's what we ought to be doing. That I think would be a step in the right direction. It would inoculate us against certain species of bullshit that we're very, very susceptible to. So, and I think the people that are best positioned to offer courses and design curricula for this kind of thing are philosophers, specifically people in the fields of epistemology. I think that's where it would have to come from.
Oh, I see where you're going now. You're trying to get philosophers employed, aren't you?
Yeah, I need a job real bad. So
that's
I'm really
being feisty. I took a page from Nick. I got a little feisty there.
That's the old joke. What did the employed philosopher say to the unemployed philosopher? Would you like fries with that?
You like fries with that?
Yeah, you got.
So mean.
Uh,
So mean.
well, okay. So I had a couple of questions. I can hold, I guess, some of them off. We could, because we're definitely going to have you back. But we started to get into what appeared to be solipsism and some leaning towards the problem of solipsism. So I was hoping you might be able to explain roughly what is solipsism and how or if that may apply to what we've been talking about here.
Okay, well, solipsism is one way to think about it as a kind of thought experiment, but it is an actual philosophical position. I don't know that anyone actually believes it, but it is a philosophical proposition about our epistemological condition. That is our relationship between us and the world. It is a philosophical position that really says you can't know anything beyond what's going on in your mind. In fact, for all you know, everything is in your mind, right? So solipsism is the proposition, hard solipsism is the proposition that there isn't an external world. Okay, there really isn't a world out there. Everything is a figment of your imagination. You say, well, how would I dream up these things? Oh, just the way you dream them up. You already believe in dreams, right? You already believe that about 6 times a night, every night, you fall into a state of REM sleep and you dream. You have a full-blooded, 3-dimensional, completely immersive virtual reality experience where you think you're awake and walking around and doing stuff. You're talking to your spouse, you're talking to your boss, you're in school, you're at work, you're fighting dragons, you're jumping out of planes, you've got magic powers, whatever. And in the dream, you think it's real. You fall for it. It is completely convincing. Your brain, practically everyone listening to this would probably agree, your brain is perfectly capable of making you think all that. Now notice, when you're in bed dreaming, none of that is happening. None of that is real. None of that is required for you to have that experience, right? I once had the bizarre dream that I was a Chinese person. I didn't look Chinese when I thought I was Chinese. I thought, well, this is what a Chinese person looks like, and I thought I was speaking Chinese, and I was having an argument with somebody. I don't remember enough about the specifics of the dream. When I woke up, I thought how curious it was that in my dream I thought I was Chinese, that I was a person of Chinese ethnicity speaking in Chinese. The words coming out of my mouth were clearly English. Now that I'm awake, right? But in the dream, that was what passed for Chinese, right? So solipsism is the view that, look, there, for all you know, there isn't. Well, no, hard solipsism is the view that there isn't a mind independent reality. Everything is in your mind. Soft or epistemological solipsism is the view that for all you know, everything is happening in your mind, because your mind is capable of generating everything. Everything that you know about the external world is generated by your mind, and your mind doesn't require the world to be there to generate a completely veridical VR immersive experience that passes for real, that you don't even question, right? So that's solipsism. So that throws up this problem of a kind of radical skepticism. What exactly can you be confident of? Not what can you be certain of. Never mind certain. What can you be confident of? Descartes had this famous thought experiment that sometimes called the evil genius, or the dream hypothesis. How do you know you're not dreaming right now? You say, well, dreams aren't like this. Oh, really? You're telling me that when you're dreaming, you always know you're dreaming? Why the hell are you scared in a nightmare? Right? Why are you more scared in a nightmare than you are watching a movie? Right? I've had experiences where I woke up panting, screaming, gasping for breath, absolutely stark terrified, because I had just a terrible dream, a nightmare about a murder that took place of someone I love, and it was horrific. Right? I've never had an experience like that watching a movie. I mean, I could watch my wife in a movie being decapitated by Jason or Freddy Krueger or something like that, and it might creep me out, but that's it. Like that would be it. It would not be like a nightmare. But I mean, dreams are so realistic, or can be so realistic, that there's no telling them from reality. It's not like when you have it's not like when you have a dream, the experience of dreaming something comes with a little tag that tells you this is just a dream.
Yeah.
Right? Because you wouldn't be terrified, right?
Yeah.
Now, consider. I mean, sometimes you're sort of waking up out of a dream, and there are some things that are anomalous, and your critical faculties are coming online, and you're noticing how disjointed the experience is, and you're going, "What the hell's going on?" And it's usually right before you wake up, right? Clearly, when you're dreaming, your critical faculties are down. Things just pass that might otherwise not pass. But the point is, how do you know that's not happening right now? How do you know that your critical faculties aren't up and running right now, and that you're not dreaming? So Descartes' argument for radical skepticism, that's a hypothetical argument that he advances early on in the first couple of chapters of a book. He advances this to call into question everything that you think you know, and it's not, the point isn't even that you can't be certain. It's that if this is true, if my mind is capable of generating all of this, and none of this needs to be here for my mind to generate this hallucination, then I have no reason to be confident about anything I think I see.
Yeah.
Never mind certain, confident. Well, I shouldn't even be confident that this is a human hand if I am actually in that condition. And it would appear I am in that condition. As a matter of fact, I believe I'm in that condition. We are all in that condition. That is the human condition. We are all unable to sort of get outside of ourselves, look at what we're thinking, look at the world, and say, yeah, what you're thinking matches with what the world is like. Therefore, you know what you think you know. That's the problem that's a problem with correspondence theory. It's a major objection to correspondence theory. Right? This is a conception of truth. This is a theory of truth, correspondence theory, that doesn't let you know when your beliefs are true or false. Right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's a defeater, but I think it's a liability with the
Yeah, and that is kind of the difference between sensation and perception, which is another field within psychology. Of there's never a complete map onto sensation and perception, meaning that what you experience is never going to be exactly what you perceive to be experiencing, and that's that makes sense that would be. So we had one more question from Nick, I think.
Well, no, you know what I'll do? I will. We can pass it on. I think we're gonna. This will be a good segue, probably into. Oh my God, I do. Hume's problem of induction, or the hard problem of hard consciousness. So we will definitely have you back. You're going to be canoeing. Is that what you're going out and enjoying life?
Yeah. I'm a backcountry canoe tripper, and I've been waiting all winter so I could start doing this in the spring, and then of course the coronavirus hit, and no one was allowed to move around. And I mean, I live out in the country, and it would be easy to go camping and canoeing, but we're supposed to stay home, practice social distancing, and things like that. So I haven't been able to do it much. But finally, they have relaxed things enough that we are allowed to go camping. So I went on a solo canoe trip a short time ago. I'm going with a friend in a couple of days from now. Actually, the day after tomorrow, I'm going doing for a few days with a friend of mine. It's going to be a social distance canoe trip, so everybody knows. I'm taking my solo canoe. He's taking his solo canoe. Separate tents, cooking separate meals, and we just have to be prepared to feed a lot of black flies and mosquitoes because this is a bad time of year.
All right. Well, I think we definitely we're gonna hook up with you when you get back and do another one of these. We really appreciate you coming on and explaining all this to us. I would like to end with a poignant and I think just very apropos comment from Tony Designs. Tony said that let's see, he started an organization. He started Solipsists Anonymous, but he was the only one who showed up for the meetings. Thank you all for joining us, and Patreon Hangout tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. For those of you who are patrons of the show, we really appreciate your support. Thank you, Ozzy. Thank you, Courtney, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Mm-hmm.